Hello and welcome to our presentation. My name is Allison Rief and I'm presenting today with Ellen Belcher. We are presenting an analysis of critical thinking scores from student performance and faculty performance on instructional quality reviews. We're really hoping you enjoy this and that we win the longest title possible for our presentations here. A little bit about myself. I am currently the department chair for the AAECE program in the College of Ed, and Alan is working within the MAID program also within the College of Ed. Previously, I taught in the K through 12 setting. I was a pre-K, second, and third grade teacher. And Alan has worked at numerous different institutions in the faculty as well as in the administration role. We are both working on IQRs in the faculty support and development for the College of Ed, so we have lots of interest with critical thinking. Off to Alan.
We wanted to perform this study because we're convinced that critical thinking is the most important skill that we could help our students acquire. According to Fish and McLeod, for instance, we are preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist. They'll be using technologies that haven't been invented in order to solve problems that we don't know are even problems yet. So we have to focus on more than teaching and learning. Instead, students need to be taught how to think about their thinking so that their own metacognitive skills can carry them throughout that changing world. The College of Education and Ashford, like many other institutions of higher ed, recognize a need to foster critical thinking in students. And this is clearly the case at Ashford, since our institution learning outcome number 1 is devoted to critical thinking. But what is not known, and what we studied in this research project, is the relationship of two pieces of data. First, the perception of faculty work in fostering critical thinking, and 2, critical thinking as seen in student performance. So for the purposes of this project, assignments mapped to institutional learning outcome number 1 are used to demonstrate critical thinking skills. Now, in the College of Ed at Ashford, associate faculty and full-time faculty participate in a process known as the Instructional Quality Review, or IQR. At least once a year, faculty work is reviewed against a set of minimum expectations and a rubric. The rubric consists of 5 criteria that's used across the institution. One of those 5 criteria is how faculty foster critical thinking. A reviewer has examples of what constitutes various scores and descriptors on the rubric. The scores range from distinguished to proficient to developing to beginning and to not observed. So this project compared the scores on the Instructional Quality Review for faculty performance in critical thinking to the student performance seen on those assignments that are mapped to critical thinking outcome. Our research questions were: what is the aggregate and range of scores on the IQR? What is the aggregate and range of scores for student performance on critical thinking? What relationship, if any, exists between those two scores? And then, to what extent do students actually demonstrate critical thinking? And how might changes in our process or product related to critical thinking be indicated after reviewing these data? In 2011, the book Academically Adrift came on scene. It indicated that students were not learning in undergrad institutions, partly because there really was not an expectation by faculty for students to do so. There was a lack of rigor, a lack of driving students to work harder, which seemed to be a key component. Since that time, many institutions of higher education have used this book as a springboard to develop programs that would help students to develop critical thinking skills. A later study by Pascarella and Belcher found similar results while using different measures. These studies led us to question if Ashford faculty are adequately pushing students to think more critically through their efforts in online classes. One of the major points from those studies was that there was not a consistent definition of what constitutes critical thinking. Even with all of that, Raynaud and Murray found that the use of higher order questioning during a course had positive correlation with higher performance on a measure of critical thinking at the end of the course. This study most closely is related to what we proposed and we were looking for a correlation between the posing of higher order questions to students and student performance on measures of critical thinking. In our IQR process, we often believe that the posing of those questions in the discussion forums is how faculty can foster critical thinking skills in students. So that study by Renaud and Murray was very closely tied to what we wanted to accomplish. Following that, Fink showed us that learning to learn, metacognition, or critical thinking, is an important aspect of college learning, and there are ways to build learning experiences that promote it. Building on all these authors, we hope to find what we believed as critical thinking at Ashford and to find examples of whether or not we actually produce that type of learning in our students. We determined, once we had collected the data, that a correlational analysis would be best. In our work, we had two variables to be examined, and we wanted to determine what, if any, relationship existed between the two. There was no attempt to manipulate the variables, only to determine if a relationship existed, and if there was a relationship, the nature and extent of it. In our case, the variables were the aggregated scores on critical thinking assignments within a course and a corresponding score on critical thinking as observed on the IQR rubric. Our population for the study was all students who submitted assignments in classes within the College of Ed and all faculty who taught those courses in the year 2015. Data from this research was existing data. No interaction with human subjects occurred. The data on student performance was provided by the Office of Assessment. The second set of data came from the scores collected in 2015 by the Faculty Support and Development Team of the College of Ed during their normal review of faculty performance. At no time was contact made with students, faculty, or other individuals involved in these courses. Once we had the IQR data from all the courses that were reviewed, we matched those to courses for which we had student performance data from the mapped assignments. A correlation was performed on the IQR scores for faculty for fostering critical thinking and the aggregated student critical thinking score. We were looking to see if there was a correlation between the faculty work on critical thinking and student performance on critical thinking. We also correlated the first week of each class's performance with the IQR and the last week of performance with the IQR, looking to see if there was improvement over the period of the course. The confidentiality of subjects has been maintained by keeping files password protected, and neither instructor names nor student names were recorded outside of the archived data obtained from the courses. We, as the researchers, have done this type of work before, and we know the need to protect the confidentiality and protect and research subjects' data.
So here are our results. We had a total of 110 sections in which we had valid scores for both an IQR score and student performance on critical thinking. These 110 cases were placed into the statistical analysis using SPSS. For our associate faculty, their scores ranged from a 1.0 to a 4.0, which could be described as either beginning, developing, proficient, or distinguished. Before we put the scores in, we found the mean score, which was a 2.65, so it fell somewhere between proficient and developing. For our student performance, the range was between a 2.0 to a 4.0, which can be described as basic, proficient, and distinguished. Before we ran the scores, the mean score for that was a 3.28, so it was somewhere between proficient and distinguished. When we ran the Pearson correlation of the two sets of scores, it yielded a negative 0.248 with a significance level of 0.01. We also did a second data grab in which correlational analysis was performed, in which we separated the scores from week 1, which is the beginning of the course, to either week 5 for undergraduates and week 6 for graduate courses, which is the end of those courses, in order to see if there was a change in student critical thinking scores from the beginning of the course to the end of the course as correlated with the IQR scores. So for week 1, we found there was a Pearson correlation of negative 0.254. And in weeks either 5 or week 6, the end of the course, there was a Pearson correlation of negative 0.146. Some of you may be scratching your head right about now saying, that doesn't seem right. But based on the Pearson correlation results, the data suggests that there is a weak to moderate negative correlation between the extent to which faculty foster critical thinking and the actual student performance on critical thinking. Now, for those of you who are having a really hard time remembering your statistics courses, or perhaps you have permanently blocked them out like I have a tendency to do, let me put this in simpler terms. So the higher the critical thinking score for the instructors, the lower the student's critical thinking score. This is obviously the opposite of what we'd like to have it be, as well as the opposite of what we originally thought would be the outcome of our research. So based on this data, it might be concluded that the faculty efforts in improving their students' critical thinking is not working. So maybe we should just throw it all out the window and give up. Well, we have some other ideas for that. We have come up with a few possible explanations for the negative correlation we saw in our research. It's important to realize that the data we collected came from assignments only. And it may be the case that faculty focus on critical thinking in other formats besides written assignments. Many faculty may seek to build students' critical thinking skills through the use of questioning, which is not a technique possible within a written assignment. This may manifest itself more readily in interactions between students and faculty within the discussion forums. Discussions often lead to engagement, and we can actually see if the students are thinking critically by the way they respond to us. Perhaps we ask them to defend their thinking or to point out another point of view, which we can see in their responses. This research was done before we had discussions and waypoints, so we did not have any discussions here on the student end, but IQRs do include the way faculty interact with students in discussions and how they focus on critical thinking. So while we're looking at faculty critical thinking within discussions, we didn't look at students, and that may be causing part of the issue. Another possible explanation for the negative correlation we found could relate to rigor. It may be the case that faculty who attempt to encourage their students to think more critically in class are also more rigorous in their grading of critical thinking efforts. It may just be more important to them, and so they're more likely to notice that the students aren't living up to what their expectations are. Another possible compounding variable is the extent to which the assignments mapped to critical thinking outcomes are truly indicative of critical thinking needs. I don't know about you, but I've taught courses before where the critical thinking component in the waypoint rubric doesn't necessarily make a great match for what the students are being asked to do. So therefore the grading may not be indicative of the actual critical thinking the students are asked to do. One final possible explanation for the negative correlation could relate to communication styles. It may be possible that a faculty member's style of communicating with students or how the instructor attempts to drive critical thinking may influence students' performance on the assignments. Some Instructors might encourage students through their discussion forum or feedback, emails, or announcements. Others may be very explicit within their coursework and say, do it this way, while others are more vague about it. Since we were relying only on assignment scores and IQRs, we couldn't see these other nuances. As you can imagine, this weak to moderate negative correlation left us with a lot of questions that we hope to uncover answers for in future research. As stated previously, it's possible that instructors who encourage students to think critically may be more rigorous in their grading of critical thinking. We could attempt to evaluate this characteristic by conducting a follow-up study using a Likert scale questionnaire, or we could try qualitative methods to shed light on grading practices for the associate faculty included in the original study. As we feel that evidence of critical thinking may be more readily identified through elements outside of the written assignments, further research could be done by drawing data from the discussion forum grading as well as the written assignments. Then this data could be compared against each other or viewed holistically to get a better picture of overall critical thinking efforts. Finally, this research study was conducted using adjunct faculty. Another area of further research is to conduct the same study using the full-time faculty as the instructor subgroup. This data would show if there is a difference in the correlation between full-time faculty and their students compared to adjunct faculty and their students. As both of us are full-time faculty here at Ashford, we were not able to pull the data ourselves, as it would provide us with the IQR reports of our peers. Alan and I would like to thank you for listening to our research. We were hoping that this would be a little more interactive, but we did the best we could with recording. If you would like to provide us with any feedback or any ideas on future research or complaints, concerns, anything, well, if they're complaints, you can email Alan. But we would love to hear from you. So there are email addresses. You can also respond to us in the TLC app, and we'll be manning that for a while. Thanks so much.